Hey, in this video, we're going to take a look at a raw data ILS approach. We're shooting the ILS approach 27 left into Atlanta. First, let's address why would you ever want to do a raw data approach. The first reason is perhaps we have an auto flight FCU 1+2 fault. Maybe we have a dual FMGC failure. Or maybe you just want to practice a raw data ILS approach, assuming the visibility is not less than 4,000 RVR or 3/4 mile visibility. Now, the bird is going to be utilized in this scenario here. The bird is also commonly referred to as track FPA. Remember that it is a reference as to where the airplane is actually headed in space, not necessarily where it is pointed. Just to validate that, think about any typical approach that you do. We have a positive nose-up pitch attitude, despite that the airplane is actually sinking in space. So remember, both from a vertical and a lateral perspective, the track FPA, otherwise known affectionately as the bird, is showing us where we are actually headed in space. Now in this particular scenario, we're going to look at various different examples: a headwind, a crosswind, paralleling. Finally, we'll look at diverging and then intercepting of the localizer. We're going to start it out with a headwind as we track inbound on this ILS approach into Atlanta. What we see here is our track 275, and our localizer needle is showing centered. The localizer centered, the bird is also centered with the blue stick, which is the indication that is consistent with the track that we have selected on the FCU, which is 275. Again, this is a headwind scenario that we're looking at. I'm now going to go ahead and place in a crosswind from the left. The winds are now going to show 180 at 10 knots. And we'll see how this affects our bird live. What we see here is a heading further left, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 270 or so, is being required in order to maintain the same track, because remember, the aircraft is turning into the wind, despite the fact that over ground we're still tracking, in this case, on the localizer. Remember, the localizer needle here is centered along with our track being centered with the bird. You will notice the bird and the track, which is that blue line, is all centered up, which is precisely what we're looking to do, despite the fact that the heading is slightly into the direction of the wind. Let's now look at an example of paralleling. We'll have Sebastian Fajardo parallel. Your choice, Sebastian. Looks like we're going left. So we're going to make a left parallel here. He's turning slightly off of the localizer. We'll know that because obviously the localizer needle indication is swinging off to the right. Once that localizer indication swings off right, we're going to begin to realign the bird with the blue stick, that track. And now what we're going to see is we have the bird aligned with the stick. We're paralleling the track 275, and we're also paralleling the localizer, really is what we're doing here. And we're never going to obviously intercept on this heading because we would need a further right heading in order to actually get back on our localizer needle. Let's now show a diverging track. So with that, we'll have Sebastian turn further off, and we'll see how this only exasperates or gets further away from our localizer indication. We're turning further left. Our track is continuing over the ground to be further away from, in this case, left of the localizer, as noted by the localizer indication going further and further away. You can also see that the blue stick is not aligned with the bird, which is further evidence that we are not on a path to get back on, which would be an intercept, or even parallel, but rather we're diverging away from a 275 track. Let's now go to a intercepting of the 275 track. Sebastian's now making his way right, and what we can see is our heading now more of a northerly, turning towards a northerly, about a 280, 285 here. We're going to make our way not only towards the localizer, but closer to this 275 track. The bird in this case right now is indicating, as he turns onto it, the re-intercept into the 275 track, and you can see that localizer needle is starting to come back in as our ground track takes us back into the interception of the localizer. Once we're centered on it as we are here, you can now see that we move to place the track FPA, or the bird indication, back in line with the blue stick or the attitude indicator. For the purposes of this video, clearly we've disregarded the instability of the approach, and that was intentional to illustrate to you here the bird and the tracking with raw data.